My name is Dr. Clyde Ledbetter Jr. I'm a teacher of African World Studies. For me, it wasn't that bad. Prior to coming to Ottawa, I had learned to teach online. As a university professor is my full-time job. And I learned to conduct online classes and create online courses all the way back in 2015. So coming to Canada, I was still working for universities in the States, doing everything virtually. And then when the pandemic hit, I was basically doing the same thing. And in fact, actually, I started working at another university, Virginia Commonwealth University, because when the pandemic hit, a bunch of universities were looking for folks that could teach online. So I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. The other job that I have, I'm a mentorship coordinator for Jaku Convent. And our program brings young people together with professionals and other adults in the community to help them reach whatever goals they want to reach, as well as brings them together to help build our community for the future. I had taken that job in January 2020, so right as the pandemic had started. We had our first 2 meetings in person in January. I think we had one in February, and then everything shut down. So it was a transition to move that program online, to have all our meetings over Zoom, to figure out creative ways to keep young people engaged from home, to bring in guest speakers. And it actually opened up some opportunities because we were able to bring people in to talk to our young people who otherwise wouldn't have been able to speak with, or it would have been incredibly difficult to get them. Folks from Toronto, folks from the States even, we had brought people in to talk. So that was an adjustment, and our young people were incredibly resilient, so they came online with us and worked, and we were able to do some things. Now the challenge is moving back into the physical space, trying to get people off of line, but it's a good challenge to have. Resilience is good. It's a good trait to have, but a better trait to have is not even to be put in a position to be resilient. Because resilience means something happened to you and you recovered from it. We've been really good at that, from enslavement to colonization to neo-colonization to anti-Black racism. We've been dealing with these things for the past few centuries, and we've come out of them, and we've grown stronger as a people. But the task for the future is to move away from resilience to shoring up our position and our development so that we're never down in the first place. But yeah, we're incredibly resilient, and this pandemic has showed that. You know, we made it through, and unlike other groups, we're not only dealing with the pandemic, but you're dealing with the pandemic on top of anti-Black racism, Afrophobia, all these things, neo-colonialism, all over African people all over the world are dealing with this. So we have all these double and triple pandemics that we're dealing with, and we're still here. And we're still building, and we will continue to build and fight. And that's what I love about our folks. One of the things that I love so much is finding the connections between our people. Oftentimes our history is taught very isolated. You'll learn Nigerian history, you'll learn Ghanaian history, you'll learn the history of Jamaica, you'll learn the history of Blacks in Brazil. And very rarely do the connections between those places and the peoples in those places get displayed. I love those connections. And the more you read African history, particularly in the past few centuries, the more interconnected it is. People travel, ideas travel, movements are inspiring each other. And we think now that this is an age of globalization and the technology that I mentioned. But even back then, these connections were happening. Youth were creating student movements all over the globe and connecting with each other and inspiring other generations. So I love that. I love seeing those connections and making those connections. Because oftentimes when we only study the history in isolation, you can talk to a brother in Nigeria and they know Nnamdi Azikiwe was their first president, but they don't understand that, or maybe never realized that Nnamdi Azikiwe was a student in the US. He studied at Lincoln University, and he worked with some of the giants of the Harlem Renaissance, and was living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and did all these things that connected him to African movements, and worked with, when he was a student at Howard University, he worked with a guy named Malcolm Nurse, who would become George Padmore, who's from Trinidad and is a great African organizer. So we have all these connections that are rarely talked about. We only learn one, portion of the story. So the connections is one of the big things that I love about learning history. The second thing I would say is the role of African women throughout our history. We can look at any struggle, any movement for development or defending African people, and you will see the strongest fighters and strongest builders oftentimes are these sisters that don't get enough credit that they should. And we have to do a better job at exposing that and really questioning where we're at as a people today. We have 55 countries and only one is led by a woman. That's not traditionally the African way. So the role of our women, connections, I would say the ingenuity of our people. We create a lot. When left to our own devices, we create. When we're engaged in struggle, we still create, whether it's artistically, whether it's mechanically, whether it's agriculturally. We're a creative group of people, and no matter what the external situation is. So I love that about us. So connections, our women, our creativity. Let's see, what else? I'll stick with those three for right now. Yeah, I think those three are major highlights of things that I love learning about. Yeah, I would say any challenge, there's opportunity in every challenge. And this was a challenge, so we have to look at it and not just the negative aspects, but the positives. This pandemic showed the possibility of what we can do with technology and how we can be connected even if it's not physical. And one of the bright spots of this, like I mentioned before, was that the technology allowed us to connect across continents and to do events with folks in Nigeria. I was on a bunch of Nigerian TV shows, news channels over the pandemic. Would that have been possible? For sure, but it made it even more possible. It made it something that wasn't out of the realm of possibility anymore, because we were doing everything online. So it was nothing to connect with somebody in Zimbabwe, to connect with somebody in Congo, and really having it be more consistent. Not just a special thing, it's like an everyday thing now. So we can take that moving forward, and particularly you're talking about a business. Now, I'm a teacher, I'm not a businessman, but I can see opportunity. And the fact that we have these technologies now that we're used to using these technologies more now, we can take a business that started in Ottawa and have customers and clients and service connections all over the world and all over the African world. We're bringing folks together. We're learning about each other, not just about the past, but what's currently going on in real time. And I think that is one of the blessings of this challenge that we've had. So that's the advice I'll give. Let's all stay connected. Even after we open back up, let's not forget that we have these connections that we can still make, we can still build, and Yeah, I think that's what I would say. I think it all goes back to education. It's one of the big things that I fight for. And unfortunately, particularly, well, it's not even just the West. It's even back home sometimes on the continent that we believe or still believe that our labor has to be controlled by somebody else. We have to go to a quote unquote good school and then work for a good company, and then they take all our creativity. And part of that starts with the education system. We have to revamp that. We have to revamp it so that we're looking at African youth around the world and we're saying, we want you to develop as fully as possible for you, your family, and our communities. Sometimes we get in the habit of telling our children, we want you to develop so that you can get the best job working for somebody else. And then what happens is that talent that could have been used to do that creativity and that ingenuity that we talked about is being used by bigger companies for their interests. And the creativity's still there. You got Black people doing amazing things, working for Google and Microsoft and all these other places, but it ultimately doesn't feed our communities. And that is in all types of spheres: technology, art, music. We look at our music, we're creating all this, but the ownership is somebody else. There's only three real record companies in the world. It's Warner Brothers, Universal, and Sony. That's it. Everything else is a subsidiary of one of those three, the big record companies. And so many of our artists are striving to get record contracts instead of being independent artists. And now with the technology, you don't really even need the record companies anymore, to be honest. But so many people don't know about that side of it. So those are things that we need to teach our young people. It's a spirit, because they have the skill, but the spirit and the will to create for yourself, to control your creation, and to do it to uplift your community as opposed to uplifting somebody else's bottom line.